The first black astronaut is going to the moon, and it doesn't even feel like it's a big moment. And it made me think, what is the responsibility of black media when something like this happens? Victor Glover is part of that Artemis mission. Navy pilot, test pilot, combat veteran, over 3,000 flight hours, and now he's heading to the moon. The first black astronaut to do it. And they keep coming back to that, because it should feel bigger, not forced, not overhyped, but bigger than this. And when it doesn't, I start paying attention to something else. What actually gets pushed? Because if you look at it, we hear about certain parts of the culture all the time. Music, sports, entertainment. And that's not a problem. But it does make you notice what doesn't get the same energy. Because this right here, discipline, aviation, science, this is culture too. And what's happening at the highest level. But it doesn't always move the same way. Once you see that, you start realizing this isn't new. Back in the 1800s, black newspapers had to be created just to make sure our stories were even recorded. Because if they weren't written down, they didn't exist in public record. Papers like the Chicago Defender weren't just reporting the news. They were showing people the different reality, documenting black life when nobody else was, covering migration, opportunity, progress, making sure those stories actually reach people. Then over time, that same need just moved into new forms. Magazines, radio, television. BET gets created, a space where black culture is centered constantly. But even that changes. Ownership shifts, control shifts. And when that happens, what gets highlighted can shift too. So this has always been a pattern. If we don't have strong platforms, our stories don't always land the way they should. And that brings me back to this moment. Because this isn't just a story. This is a black pilot trained at the highest level, trusted with a mission to the moon. And it still feels kind of quiet. Not invisible, but not amplified either. Once I noticed that, I started seeing things everywhere. Scientists, engineers, builders, people doing real things at a high level, but never really become moments. And that's where media comes in. Not as an idea, but as a function. Because it's not just about what happens. It's about what gets repeated, what gets seen enough times, that it becomes part of the culture. And if something isn't being repeated, it slowly starts to feel smaller than it actually is. That is what it feels like. Not because the moment is small, but because it's not being pushed like it's big. And that's where black media matters. Not just history, but it's something that still needs to be built. Because if we don't build the spaces that carry our stories like this, we're always depending on someone else to decide how big our moments are. And history has already shown what happens when that decision isn't ours. So when I look at Victor Glover, I'm not just seeing the achievement. I'm seeing the gap between what happens and how it's remembered. That's what needs to be built. That's why I'm building Chaotic Styles. Not just to create stories, but to have a place where they can actually land. Where something like this feels like what it is. A moment.